Good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting of the West Haymarket JPA. I want to call this meeting to order and introduce my colleagues. To my right is Regent Tim Clare, and to my left is Council Member Tammy Ward. I'm Mayor Lyrin Gaylor-Baird, and I'm glad to be here together today. This is a public meeting subject to the Open Meetings Act, a copy of which is posted in the back of the chambers. Our order of business is that the clerk will call each item on the agenda. Staff will come forward and present, and afterwards we will take 5 minutes of public comment, up to 5 minutes of public comment from anyone who would like to speak. And we just ask that each speaker please state your name and address for the record. And with that, I would ask Casey to please call the first item.
The first item is approval of the minutes from the JPA meeting held November 3rd, 2021.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Claire, second by Ward. Any discussion of the minutes? All right, please call the roll.
Ward,
Yes.
Claire,
Yes.
Gaylor-Baird.
Yes.
Motion carried 3-0. The next item is approval of the payment register for October through December 2021 and review of the expenditure report as of December 31st, 2021.
Mayor Baird, Regent Claire, Council Member Ward, David Young, 555 South 10th Street. We have a few highlights from this quarterly payment register report. $102,944.75 for staff costs paid out of the JPA budget. $244,162 for city risk management for our 21-22 insurance premiums. $12,787,808.57 to Union Bank and Trust for our semi-annual JPA bond principal payment and interest. $406,415.41 City of Lincoln parking for August through November of 2021. $664,792.50 to the District Energy Corporation for, again, October, November, and December. $471,484.26 was billed back to our customers, or our 70.9% average. PBA Arena was reimbursed $494,467.92, which went to the following: $94,467.92 for arena repairs and maintenance. $250,000 was transferred. This is the SMG Global contract. And then $150,000 for our operating increment.
Thank you. Any questions for David Young?
David, we had some bond payments plus some principal. I'm just curious our current status relative to our ability to make those payments in the future, and your thoughts, please.
Sure. So occupation taxes are what we use to pay those payments. This year's occupation tax, we're 38.87% ahead of 2020's occupation tax collection. That is good, but 2020 is not the baseline year that we would like to use. We are 19.06%, or $2,799,751 over last year's projection, over our budget. And that corresponds to a 2030 year projection for collections. If you look at the overall picture since the inception of the JPA, we are 17.62% more collected on our occupation taxes, or $25,154,547. So we have weathered the storm well. We hope that we remain open with the virus and everything else, and that we are back on track.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. And at this time, we'd be happy to take any speakers who'd like to testify on this item.
Jane Kinsey with Watchdogs. So the, and you're including all of this, aren't you? The revenues and expenditures?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So there's a loss of $4 million for the year, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So is there any plan? Is it being addressed? How to make that up?
So what you're seeing here is a quarterly report And we paid our $12 million out. So as the year progresses, we hope to cover that completely. So you're just seeing a timing payment here.
You hope.
We are on track.
Okay. When you say you hope, though, you expect to make up $4 million?
So this is our quarter, right? We're 38% ahead, 19% past budget. So as long as we continue on that trend and we don't shut down, we will cover the $4 million.
Based on that sheet?
Based on the collections of occupation tax, yes.
Based on what?
The occupation tax collection?
Oh, okay. And is that in arrears or is that projection?
This is actual.
Okay. So the arena is still losing money.
This is year to date. This is the budget.
David, I'm sorry, could you
Right.
say your answers into the microphone so we can hear you better too, for the record?
I apologize. Thank you.
That's okay. It's just harder
So-
to hear.
The first column that you're looking at, Jane, is the actual. So there's
Yeah.
$647,000 ahead, actually, here versus the budget.
But it shows a loss on the annual budget.
So that's the annual side of it.
Okay, for the year then, it has a loss.
At a quarter, we're showing a loss, but when you look at the annual, we're ahead.
That's from last August.
Correct.
Okay. Is the 600,000 that the JPA lent them still keeping that going, or has that been repaid? I don't see anything where it's repaid.
That's the operating increment, and we pay that out as part of the budget.
What?
That's the operating increment.
Yeah. That's what they lent them.
It was not a loan.
Well, they transferred money to them.
They did transfer money.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, has that been repaid, or is that figured in this budget?
It has not been repaid. It is figured in the budget.
Okay. So if we look at this, is there a plan to repay it back?
There's no plan to repay the $600,000 that was transferred to the JPA in the 2020 year, currently in the budget.
Okay. And so they will keep that?
As of right now, yes.
Okay. And how does the $2 million bonus from the feds figure in this? Is that the income here, or?
The $2 million from the feds was in
1 minute.
last year's budget. This is the quarterly report for this year.
Okay, so it's in last year's budget?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? All right. Entertain a motion on the
So moved.
payment register.
Second?
Okay, moved by Claire, second by Ward. Any further discussion? All right, please call the roll.
Ward,
Yes.
Claire,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird.
Yes.
Motion carried 3-0. The next item is WH 22-1, resolution to accept the financial audit and management letter and report from BKD CPAs and advisors for the period ending August 31st, 2021.
Good afternoon, board members. Chris Linner, BKD CPAs here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And happy to be with you again this year to present the audit results for the JPA for its fiscal year ended August 31st, 2021. Within your packet, you should have had two documents, one an audit report that contains our audit opinions, the financial statements and footnotes, as well as kind of a shorter letter. I have the black and white copy. I believe you have the color BKD logo at the top, which is the required communication letter, or sometimes referred to as a management letter. So I'll cover kind of both of those concurrently, just as they do kind of work together in terms of the letter really helps you understand some of the items within the financial statements in the audit report. First, I just want to thank the efforts of city management. Obviously, during kind of unique circumstances, this year we were back on site to be here at City Hall to do the audit of the financial statements, the JPA. So worked alongside city management in getting the documentation we need, asking the questions, doing the testing required. So we appreciate their efforts in getting us what we needed in a timely fashion as well. In terms of our approach, we do some interim, we do some planning early on, closer to year end. And so that involves looking at some of those internal controls. I know there's always some questions around that. So looking at, are there controls in place to make sure that there are not material, or to help prevent or alleviate the risk of misstatement of the financial statements, and also looking at segregation of duties. Are there proper checks and balances? Are there enough folks with sets of eyes on things that would help obviously reduce the risk of error or fraud in the financial statements? So from that initial testing, we did not identify anything from a concern standpoint that needed to be reported in writing to the management or the board. As well, then looking at kind of moving through the approach, we're on site here then in November, like I said, here at City Hall, working with folks with city management in terms of just getting through the audit documentation, and then kind of let you know our review process. So in addition to the team we have here, and then myself looking at it, kind of from maybe an objective look at the financials, having another partner within the firm that's looking at kind of all the documentation that our team has put together and been through, so that from a standard standpoint, making sure we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's there, and then also making sure that there's just kind of that fresh set of eyes on the financials. So somebody that's not involved in the relationship with the JPA, making sure that we're doing what we need to from a standard standpoint, from an independent standpoint, that they're understanding everything in our documentation, that we're doing what we need to do in terms of our internal checks and balances as part of our audit process as well. Getting through the audit report, I want to mention there's two opinions within there. The first opinion is just a few pages in. That's the kind of independent auditor's report, and that's really the opinion on the financial statements. So that was a clean opinion, an unmodified opinion under the new language, so meaning that the financial statements are presented in accordance with GAAP. And then near the very back of the report, you'll find a second opinion that talks about internal control over financial reporting. And that's because of the JPA structure. We have to look at things from kind of a compliance standpoint. And so that's where I mentioned those internal controls. If we had internal control findings or deficiencies that rose to the level to be in writing, they would have to be presented within that second opinion or report. And so you'll note that there are none included in there, meaning that opinion can kind of be considered also a clean or an unmodified opinion as well. Touching on some items in the financial statements, I won't dig into the numbers in great detail unless you have any specific questions. Maybe just a few things to note. A few pages into the report is a section called Management's Discussion and Analysis. So if you only have a few minutes to get through the document, this is a kind of a good high-level read of the financials. As well, because of how the JPA presents its financials, it really only has things on a single-year presentation. So the MD&A, that Management's Discussion and Analysis, presents things in a comparative format. So you can see year over year from the balance sheet, and then also the statement of activities, how do things compare at the end of fiscal 21 compared to the end of fiscal 20. And then there's a little bit of narrative if things have changed, maybe more significantly than others. It'll give you a little bit of discussion and evaluation of maybe what caused that change. So that's a good place to spend if you've maybe only got 10 or 15 minutes to read the report. Kind of gives you a high-level overview of the financial statements and the financial activities of the JPA for the year ended 2021. Moving through the document itself, something I've mentioned in the past, always remembering that the JPA is presented under governmental accounting standards. So the items reported here are going to look different than a private sector business in terms of how things are reported, how things are presented. And so the financial statements present things in a governmental format, and then the footnotes kind of follow some of that more significant or sensitive information that's included in the financials. So some of the more significant items, looking at investments, capital assets, but then getting into things that maybe aren't even recorded specifically in the financials as commitments, contingencies, things that have to be evaluated as well. Related party transactions are a separate footnote within the report, so there's that activity that's disclosed separately within the footnote. One thing I did want to note, and kind of it relates to a question that was brought up here earlier. If you'll look at the end of 2021 in the right column of the financials, that the equity or the net position of the JPA at the end of the year was actually in a deficit position. And so looking at that from an auditor standpoint, we have to look at entities to say, well, can they continue as a going concern in that evaluation? And again, not meaning we can't place an opinion on it, but sometimes we'd have to have special language in our opinions if we felt that there was doubt. However, knowing the cause of that deficit was really the fact that there are capital assets, there are assets on the balance sheet that have been depreciated faster than some of the debt has been paid off currently. And then something else that we do as part of the audit process, looking at the schedule of the debt payments that will come into the future and that financial projection by management. Now, we don't express an opinion on that projection, we don't audit that projection, but we'll look at that to say, does that give us some comfort that this deficit will be made up in future years? And it did, to the point where we did not have to mention that going concern matter within our opinion. So just something to note as part of the financial statements and the audit process itself. Within the letter then, kind of like what I mentioned, it's a good roadmap. If you look at the letter, it helps you kind of maybe walk through the financials. What are the items that you want to look at, pay special attention to? It talks about the significant accounting policies of the entity. So what are the items that maybe have a bigger impact on how the financials of the JPA look? Any estimates are included there. Financial statement disclosures to pay special note to. So I kind of mentioned a few of those, but there's a bullet point list of maybe a few as you look at the disclosures of the JPA. What are ones to maybe, again, pay a little more attention to? Any audit adjustments. And so if we have some changes, so we do have a few listed there just as part of our audit process. If we identified some changes to the financials that we propose, we have a few just items listed there that were fairly minor. And then looking through in terms of other matters, and really the only thing there, as part of our audit process, if there are best practices or suggestions, a lot of times we'll make those verbally to management as we go about our audit process. Here, the only thing we have listed in writing is a new accounting standard that will be effective for the JPA, will be effective for the city, for all governmental entities really in the next fiscal year, and that's related to leases. And so that will have on many entities have a much bigger impact on how the financial statements will look going forward. But that's something obviously, I won't go into depth into that new standard now, but we've already had conversations with city management regarding that and the impact it will have on the overall financial statements of the JPA going forward. So with that, again, like I mentioned, I didn't want to dig into the numbers in real great detail, but if you have any specific questions on those, let me know, or questions about anything else.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have two
Read your
questions. Thank you for your work. Two questions. One, and maybe you're not the appropriate person to ask. Maybe this is more of a question for David. But we have a lot, obviously, bond financing that provided the financing for the arena. With historic low rates, are there bonds that we should be looking to see if we can refinance with the lower rate? And to that end, if we don't do that, is there any fiduciary duty issues there? That's not question number one. Question number two is, I think David said something to the effect that there's $25 million, I believe, in cash sitting in a savings account earning 0.00001% probably. Banks aren't notorious these days for paying high rates. Is it incumbent upon us to find better uses for our cash sitting in those different accounts, earning nothing, and that we could maybe get a better return on?
I'll speak to more of the historical piece. I can't provide much of the advice, for looking forward. I know that the JPA has refunded some bond issuances in the past based on the advice of bond counsel and some other advisors. Obviously, as the outside auditor, we're not able to provide, the advice on that. So there have been some considerations in terms of bond refundings and refinancings, I guess, with some of the current legislation doing what they consider the advance refundings. Governments are a little more restricted in being able to do that, where you're able to, issue bonds today that are going to pay off bonds that can't be called until a future period. So that may have, the JPA's or the entity's hands tied a little bit as well. But I'll let, maybe if David wants to speak on that, if they've had more talks with any of their advisors or bond counsel on some future refundings. And in terms of the cash and investments, that's always a consideration to look into. of, do we have some liquidity that we can exercise to pay down debt or other means. Again, some of that, though, I'll tell you, relates to can some of those issuances be called now, or do they have to wait until a certain date? Sometimes those statements have provisions that they can't be paid down early before a certain date. So I'll let David speak to that.
We have discussed this with our bond counsel, and right now the recent refinancing has limited our ability to, there's a date certain that we can't refinance before. There are
That
some
was some
small,
Babs loans, Babs bonds, I think.
I
Build America
believe
bonds.
that's correct, but we have discussed with Ron, there are a couple of bonds that we do have that we can refinance, and we are looking to bring that forward in the spring and have a discussion about that in conjunction with the cops for fire stations and things like that we're looking at.
What about with the cash in the accounts?
Historically, we have used that as a reserve, and so do I think we could come up with an amount that should be invested? Yes, we could do that. The investments that we make are very conservative in general, and so I do think that it's something we should look at as a JPA. I wouldn't expect us to get a lot of additional revenue off of that, but I think it would be a good thing to look at.
Are there better uses for those monies?
They are the backstop for the financials of the JPA. They are the reason that we are in the shape we're in right now when we did have to shut down for over a year. So are there better uses? I think there are different uses. I think that we could take a portion of them or a subset and probably put that to use in different ways. I don't know that I would say better. I think they would be different.
Different, okay.
Yes.
That's fair. Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you so much for your work, Mr. Linder, and helping us to manage the JPA finances. We really appreciate the commitment you've had for years to helping us fulfill this fiduciary responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to testify on this item?
Jane Kinsey with Watchdogs. Did you put in a bid for doing this, or is it on contract with them in order to do this audit?
We are, so it is under a contract. We did put in a bid on this. I'll have to go back to the contract records to think how long ago that has been. But it is a multi-year contract, which allows us to, from a pricing standpoint for the JPA to be more competitive, but it
Okay.
was on a bid.
So you bid the original contract, but it's still under a contract for how many years, or do you know that?
I would have to check, but
Okay.
I do believe it. I think we have maybe 1 year left under that contract.
Okay. And to go to another issue that arose, where did the 25 million in savings come from that you discussed?
I
The
didn't
20
say savings. I didn't
I'm
say-
sorry, the 25 million in savings, or
Yeah, I don't think that was your issue. Yeah. Where did that,
Checking account.
is that from the original bonds or
This is from the collection of occupation
based on taxes?
Yes.
This, how
So-
long ago?
This was the original projection that we would be
Okay.
at to date. This is the actual amount that we have collected. There's the 25 million.
Okay, and that's in the savings at this
Yes.
time? Okay.
Yes, that's the reserve for the JPA.
Okay, and that's, did not come from the bonds, that's just from
Correct.
people's taxes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to testify on this item? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion on item 5.
I still move to accept the report.
Second.
Moved by Ward, seconded by Claire. Any further discussion among the JPA members? Okay. Casey, you could please call the roll?
Ward,
Yes.
Claire,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird.
Yes.
Okay.
Motion
Thank you.
carried 3-0. Next item, WH 22-2, resolution to approve the grant of an easement to Lincoln Electric System for underground and overhead utility lines, underground utility facilities, and/or at-grade equipment.
Good afternoon. Chris Connolly, City Law Department, 555 South 10th Street. This easement relates to the project in the South Haymarket area. It's also partially involved with the Cotswold project, which was just approved by council the other day. LES is undertaking a large undergrounding project that involves lines that go from east to west along M Street and also north to south along 7th Street. Basically, at the junction of those two lines, there's some switchgear that, because of the development in the Cotswold project, needs to be moved. And so really as part of that, it was decided to put this switchgear, which needs to be maintained there nearby, onto, get an easement from the JPA-owned property that is Lot 2 and is subject to further development by the JPA as we go along. There is no developer at this time for that property, but this is a small square property, 20 feet by 21 feet, because that's all that LES needs. It should not impact our ability to market or have someone develop that property on behalf of the JPA. And so we would like to provide this easement to LES to do that. The undergrounding project that LES is doing, I believe, is over $1 million, and it's not really improving, or it's not a betterment to their system. This is really for the benefit of the JPA and the city. And so there is no payment for this easement. We felt like that wasn't, for what they're doing, felt like it would be wrong to charge them for this easement then on top of that. So having said that, if you have any questions, be happy to answer them.
Question? No? Thank you so much. Would anyone like to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, I would call for a motion on item 6.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ward, second by Claire. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, please call the roll.
Ward,
Yes.
Claire,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird.
Yes.
Motion carried 3-0. The next item is WH 22-3, resolution to approve a right of entry agreement between the West Haymarket JPA, City of Lincoln, and Cotswold Management, allowing Cotswold Management to enter onto city and JPA property within the West Haymarket 4th edition until Cotswold completes rehabilitation and construction activities on its adjacent property.
Chris Connolly again, City Law Department. This is an agreement that would allow the Cotswold project to actually be constructed. It will give Cotswold and their contractors the ability to access their property from N Street across the JPA-owned property down there, and allow them to get their trucks and that sort of thing in there. This is a fairly standard agreement that we've used in other situations, including UNL when they wanted to have access to the bridge for their experiment on the abandoned railroad bridge. It will last really until the earlier of completion of the project, or if we were to sell the property and get it redeveloped, then they would have to find another way to access it. But again, we don't expect that's what would happen. We expect that Cotswold will be able to complete their project first. We expect that that's the way that this right of entry would be terminated. So if you have any questions on this, I'll be happy to entertain them.
Questions? No. No questions. Thanks so much, Chris. Would anyone like to speak on this item? All right, seeing none, entertain a motion on item 7.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ward, seconded by Claire. Any further discussion? All right, please call the roll.
Ward,
Yes.
Claire,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird.
Yes.
Motion carried 3-0. The next meeting date will be held Thursday, April 28th, 2022 at 2:30 p.m. here in council chambers.
All right, and with that, we would be ready to adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion to adjourn from Regent Claire, seconded by Councilmember Ward. Please call the roll.
Ward,
Yes.
Claire,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird.
Yes. All right, we are adjourned.